practicing vipassana. So I thought I would take this opportunity to discuss something about vipassana, which is a very important distinction. In fact, I don't think I've really sat down with each one of you and talked about this difference. But learning this difference will be very important to understanding the real elements of what's involved in vipassana. You're all familiar with concentration, but you might not be familiar with the distinction between concentration and mindfulness. Does anybody understand the difference between concentration and mindfulness?
Concentration is purely focusing on one point where the mind can get distracted. So sometimes you could be focusing on one point, but your mind is elsewhere. Mindfulness is having the ability to be aware that you're distracted and bringing your mind back to the present moment, to the present object of concentration.
Part of what's involved in mindfulness. The understanding the distinction may not be completely clear in the beginning, because especially in a practice like vipassana, the two are very closely intertwined. So you all know what is concentration. Keeping the attention of the mind focused on one object at the exclusion of all other objects, whether it is the breath or the heart chakra or a mantra or a sensation in the body or a yantra. The principle is the same. There's thousands of different concentration techniques. Really, if we were to investigate into the number of objects of concentration that have been explored, a single lifetime won't do. But the principle of it, there's a common thread which is exactly the same. It is the one-pointedness and the consistency of attention. So, mindfulness also involves attention, but attention in a very different sense than concentration. And don't think that in mindfulness there is no concentration, or that in concentration there is no mindfulness. So we're talking about two varieties of attention. I'll give you a metaphor which I'd like you to remember that can help to spell the difference between the two. Think of, on one hand, a statue. On the other hand, a gymnast. This is a very important distinction. Concentration is the statue. Mindfulness is the gymnast. The statue sits in one place, firm, stable, without much flexibility. He's, in a sense, very rigid, right? But extremely firm and stable. That's the one-pointedness of your attention. The gymnast is extremely flexible. Still, you're making use of the same body, right? But in a different context. The gymnast has to be kind of like a chameleon, adapting, moving, changing according to the circumstances. He has to learn how to manipulate the body in multiple different ways in order to be a gymnast. Mindfulness is much more inclusive. That's the first thing to keep in mind. While concentration is exclusive. You know, in English language, when we say mind you, right? Or do you mind? What is it that we're referring to? Some faculty of remembrance. A quality of remembrance. So when you're watching the breath and the mind drifts out of the observation of the breath, the instant you remember, okay, I've drifted out of the present moment, what is it that I am now observing? What is the new object of concentration? And then the effort to bring the mind back again to the breath. This is mindfulness. And mindfulness can have not just one object of concentration, it can have many, the full range of human experience can be explored and understood and seen without keeping your attention focused on one object. So in other words, concentration is like the man. Mindfulness is like the woman. There's a passive quality in mindfulness that's not there in concentration. You can't actually so much practice mindfulness. You can prepare the ground for mindfulness. You can reinforce a certain quality of remembrance, which then will give birth to the grace of mindfulness. But it's not really something that can be practiced. So the capacity to observe, not so much through effort. Mindfulness is more of a quality of a gentle kind of noticing. Not so much with the one-pointedness of the firm action of your concentration. Concentration is more forceful. It's a more directed effort of the will. Mindfulness is, first and foremost, you have to understand, it's very gentle, feminine. There is something passive in it. A key word to remember that could help you also to have a clearer understanding of mindfulness: patience. Patience is receptive. It receives, it accepts. Concentration is not so accepting to the range of the human experience. In vipassana, we have to learn to merge both together. Always, if you want to examine any phenomena, you'll often find that there's two forces that are involved. One which is active and one which is passive. I mentioned to you, or not to all of you maybe, the quote I mentioned the other day, nature abhors a vacuum. Yeah, I tell you. Nature detests nothingness. If you were to examine a vacuum state, what they're calling in science a vacuum state, you'll find there's two elements. Something is passive and something is also active. What is the passivity? Energy in a state of least excitation. And what is it which is active? Vibration. Creative vibration. So if we come to a state where energy is in a state of least excitation, in that emptiness it has to be filled with something. So there's two sides of the coin to it. And exactly is the same with vipassana. It has two sides of the coin. One part of it is passive. Passive in the gentleness of your mindfulness, which can be exactly like a chameleon, changing shape, changing form, adapting to circumstances, being flexible with the objects of your observation. There's nothing that needs to be excluded from your mindfulness. And it has a drop of concentration in it. Meaning there is, if your attention is going to have such wide flexibility, it needs a reservoir of energy, it needs fuel. This is why it's very important to cultivate your concentration. Because without a firm foundation of the concentration, then when you start expanding your horizons and observing multiple different objects, the full spectrum of your humanity, if the concentration is not firm, it's only a matter of time before you feel drained and exhausted. What will happen if you have concentration to the extreme? Or mindfulness to the extreme? In both cases, there's going to be a problem. With mindfulness to the extreme, your attention becomes oversensitive, without the calmness that comes from concentration. You should understand this. The firmness of concentration brings calmness and quietness of mind. If you have mindfulness without a firm foundation of the concentration, you're going to have a state which is actually, if you take it to the extreme, it's going to be similar to LSD. Think of LSD or a psychedelic drug. Your mind is oversensitized, hypersensitive, but it's lacking something which is very essential. It's lacking a clear, transparent lens that can only come from a mind which is calm and well concentrated. This is why in the LSD, unless you're a meditator or a yogi or somebody of that kind, it'll be very difficult for you to learn the distinction between what are the mental projections and what is real insightful clarity of perception. Because your mind is hypersensitive in a way that it's lacking the calmness and the quietness of mind. So you want sensitivity, but at the same time with clarity. Get my meaning? Yeah.
Am I mistaken in thinking that there's some similarity with Shavasana and Vipassana in the sense that it requires a certain amount of like letting go or acceptance?
Of course. Mindfulness is real acceptance in the present moment. It's learning to accept whatever is happening in the here and now unconditionally. Concentration has kind of an element of an escapist psychology because it does not embrace, it doesn't have welcoming arms to the full spectrum of human experience. That's the flaw in concentration. If you're just practicing concentration alone, it will bring calmness and quietness of the mind, but it cannot bring a holistic understanding into the full machinery of the mind. The mind is a machine with many different parts. I like to think of it as the different faculties of the mind are like internal organs. Just like your body has different organs with different functions, the heart, the kidney, the liver, the intestines, right? All of this which contributes to the total machinery. The mind is exactly the same. It has its internal organs. And the nature of this mind is that if you try to understand it in fragments, you will always misunderstand the holistic mind, because all the different parts are interconnected. For example, if you only learn to be sensitive to observing your thought process, you'll never really learn much about the real nature of your thought process. Other things have to be considered. For example, I've told you all this before. If you look deeply beyond the surface, at the base of your thought process is an emotional base, an emotional intensity of sorts. So for example, if the emotional base is fear, and that fear is triggered, gives rise to fearful thoughts. If it's sorrow, it gives rise to thoughts of a similar kind. You get my meaning? So if you try to understand your thought isolated from your heart, you're having a very fragmentary understanding of the holistic mind. I call it the holistic mind because this is the reality. Your mind is holistic, meaning there's all dimensions combined together. The fragmentary mind just appears to be so when you're trying to examine it only through the intellect, like let's say through psychoanalysis, or even through direct observation, watching one part of the mind. This is so important, right? To see how all the different parts are interconnected. So, Vipassana wants to combine mindfulness and concentration in a mixture which can be called special insight. Concentration provides you with the clear, transparent lens, the quietness and calmness of mind that gives you a mirror into reality. And the mindfulness gives you the sensitivity to observe a wide range of objects, just like the gymnast. Is that making sense? Is that clear? Yeah?
Is there a main distinction between, sorry for fixating on this, but is there a main distinction between Vipassana and Vipassana?
Yes, and Shavasana?
Yeah.
Of course. Shavasana both involve letting go, but Shavasana is not really intended to be an attentive kind of letting go. You let go and then you fall into, if you go with the flow, you're just going to be relaxed to the extreme and then you drift off into sleep. And of course, the difference between sleep and the kind of mental condition involved in vipassana is totally different.
So in both cases, you kind of let yourself be taken, but with vipassana, you're mindful as that journey is happening.
Yeah.
Whereas vipassana is just continuously hitting various levels of relaxation and just consistently letting go.
Right. Shavasana is designed just to help you enter into deeper and deeper relaxation, not more than that. That's why it's not recommended as a meditative posture. Just the way that it modifies the blood circulation as you're lying down and the way it reaches the brain, you'll see that it brings you into a very relaxed state. But when you're sitting in an upright posture, blood is moving more smoothly up towards the brain centers. The electrical signals along the spine are more stimulated. The difference between keeping your body in a horizontal posture and a vertical posture is enormous. So, no, Shavasana is light years away from something like vipassana. They have that one common ingredient, that they're both about letting go. They're both about embracing the present moment. They both involve an element of relaxation. But the key difference here is that with mindfulness, there's a firmness of concentration that's a continuous support for your mindfulness. So, just like a gymnast, to be highly flexible, but yet at the same time with a strength that's firm. So, on one hand, you want to develop the statue. On the other hand, you want to acquire the flexibility of a gymnast. And remember, of course, your meditation, if you're only going to practice it for an hour or two, isolated from the rest of life, the path of integration is impossible. Because life is, you have 24 hours of life to live. Right? And it can't be in such a way that, okay, I'll practice my meditation for an hour or two, and then when you come out of the meditation, you fall back into the same old habits, the same forgetfulness. Right? You have to find a means to integrate your awareness and self-knowledge. So, how will that be possible just through cultivating concentration alone? That's the mistake in all those paths which are more focused on, okay, you sit for hours and hours and hours in meditation and not developing that flexibility and adaptation that's required for the path of integration. Get me? So, that's also the difference. Vipassana is by nature an integrative method. It wants to exclude nothing at all from the field of your attention. But it comes at a price. And the price is that if you don't have that base of concentration, then your mindfulness is going to oversensitize, overstimulate the mind. You're going to have a wide range of focus, but without a firmness that can give you the clarity. You get my meaning? This is why you have to learn to merge the two together.